showing you how impressive are recent AI successes really. So some motivation, why ask that question? So I started this thing called Scan Today, which is a little website that basically asks this question all the time. It looks at media portrayals of AI stories and how accurate they are. And the core reasons that we sort of found for justifying that is that there exist many real dangers and many real prospects for present-day AI. And so it is important to distinguish between those realities, what is fact, and what is fiction. And let me justify that a bit more. So one reason is hype. So hype is one of the ways you can misunderstand AI by thinking it's better than it actually is. And looking over the past of AI, we can see it's happened. And we can also see we are kind of at the peak of AI hype right now. And if you look back in the 70s, 80s, hype has often been attributed to a slowdown in AI research, where a lot of inflated expectations were not met, and then we basically had these AI winters, right? Now many people are wondering whether we are now headed for an AI winter because of all these inflated expectations. Many people are saying that this time it's different because we have this trifecta of compute, algorithms, and data. But nevertheless, we should be careful about hype. And another reason beyond these winters is a lack of caution. So if you go on Wikipedia right now, you can actually find a list of fatalities due to autonomous cars. And there's been 4 so far. 3, I think, of them have been due to Tesla. And you can find on YouTube videos of people playing on their phones, sleeping, doing things you should not be doing while using Tesla's autopilot feature. Right? You're supposed to be engaged, you're supposed to be watching the road, but many people give Tesla's autopilot system more credit than it deserves. And so if people overestimate what AI system can do and aren't careful and don't work properly with them, we can have real trouble, right? And beyond hype, there's also panic. There's being overly worried about AI, which is another big trend. So here's a big story that a lot of AI researchers are aware of, where there was this one tweet where a person highlighted one sentence, less than one sentence, from a paper. So this is like a 7-page paper, and there was one little tidbit on developing their own language for negotiating. This was in the context of negotiation for bidding. And then someone at the Atlantic soon took that idea and read an article how an artificial intelligence developed their own non-human language. So that's how it started. Soon, another publication decided to say that researchers shut down this AI that invented the language. Thereafter, people decided that engineers panicked and pulled the plug on this AI after it developed language, and eventually it's terminated, come to life, shut down artificial intelligence. And this whole thing, to be clear, this isn't a real language. This is not an interesting phenomenon, not unexpected. It was basically a quirk in the optimization, but the way the story unfolded, people made it out to seem like a scary development when it really was not. And then beyond these kind of silly developments where people portray things incorrectly, we have actual policymakers, actual decision makers like Henry Kissinger, who recently wrote this article for The Atlantic called How the Enlightenment Ends, where he basically said that we should worry about AI and what the future poses. And then Yann LeCun, one of the top AI researchers of today, posted on Facebook about how he advised Kissinger about AI. So Kissinger asked various experts to advise him on the state of technology. And Yann LeCun highlighted a section of the article, in particular where it talked about AlphaZero, which I'll talk about in a bit, and how if AlphaZero is able to train itself to play Go within something like a few days, where will AI be in a few years? And this is wrong. Yann LeCun posted that this is wrong extrapolation. You cannot say that AlphaZero means, other skills will be automated, which I'll explain in a bit. And it's unfortunate that someone so influential made so basic a mistake. And then beyond this, we can also look at this. So this is a trailer for, I guess right here, for a movie called Do You Trust This Computer?, which Elon Musk promoted on his Twitter. and something like many millions of people watched it for free. And I don't know if you get the vibe, but this trailer is supposed to make you feel anxious. And the whole documentary is like this. It's very much anxiety-inducing, makes it seem like AI is about to develop on its own, we're going to lose control of it, this sort of thing. This is a big documentary, high production, many people have seen it, and I can tell you as a researcher who has seen it that it has a lot of things that are very wrong, and it's basically bad, and we actually wrote an article about it on Skype today. So that's a motivation. Now let me talk about some of these stories like Go, Atari, Dota, the big kind of news pieces, and show how something that looks like big AI progress often isn't that significant. Starting with AlphaGo. So actually I was set up with this by the first talk. So Go is this complicated game with a big board where you place white and black dots. You've already seen the trailer for the documentary about AlphaGo. So this is actually a clip of Lee Sedol losing and forfeiting to AlphaGo, which was very historic, right? And it was covered in a lot of publications. And you've seen this trailer actually in the last talk. This is quite a good documentary. I do recommend you watch it. So let's talk about why this was so impressive, why it's a big deal. As the previous talker explained, the big reason is branching factor. So how many moves you can do each move, right? Whereas just a way bigger board, 19 by 19, that means you have many more moves. And so it's much harder than chess, which we beat in the 90s. And the reason this is significant is unlike chess, which we beat largely with handwritten rules, we basically had a bunch of if-else statements. Here we had to use neural nets to kind of develop human-like intuition. So many people said this is different from the clue from chess, because now this is more human-like reasoning. And the other reason is that, unlike chess, it's much harder to hard-code strategies. So any of you could make a game with a branching factor and a state space larger than Go. That's easy. You just make a very big board, right? But you need to also come up with rules that make it hard to hardwire or hard-code how to play it and how to win. And Go has such a set of rules that make it hard to hard-code strategies, which is not so much the case for chess. So it was an impressive accomplishment, and many articles pointed out that it is a big deal. And it was even a bigger deal with kind of the newer versions of AlphaGo that came out in 2017, AlphaGo 0, where they trained from scratch, from zero, with no human gameplay, just learning by itself. And so many people said, well, now the AI can teach itself about human health, this is a big deal, etc. But here are some caveats to be aware of, and what I think people often miss about AlphaGo and this development in general. So the core, most important thing to realize is that even though it has these properties of larger branching factor, more abstract rules, it's categorically, fundamentally the same as chess. Okay? So this is a bit complicated, but I'll boil it down. If you look at problem complexity, we can think about various properties that make a problem easy or hard. So there is, for instance, need for memory. Do you need to remember anything between successive moves? There is whether it's easy to get a lot of data for, to simulate. And then there's whether it's game-like, and that can you tell if you're doing well or not? Most things in life don't have these problems, right? So if you're driving, you need memory often to know who's besides you or behind you or whatever. It's hard to get data for something like, I don't know, flying a plane, because you can't crash the plane on your first try. You need to be careful. And we can't easily score most things for being good or bad. These are fuzzy things and you can't develop equations for. But Go and chess have all these properties, right? So it has literally all the properties that make a problem easy for AI, except for, I guess, a slightly smaller branching factor. So yes, it's harder in chess, and yes, it was an impressive accomplishment, but the really hard problems are, speech synthesis, self-driving cars, natural language understanding, which we are still very far from even being close to. And we cannot generalize and say that because we beat Go, we can now tackle these categorically more complex problems, which a lot of people often miss when discussing the complexity of the game. And here's Garry Kasparov, who basically makes this point. So I'll admit that, but the basic quote, when it's a closed system, when it's a simple system, unlike the real world, is what's important. Then another point that people often miss is the current state of AI is still not nearly as impressive in people in terms of how it learns. And so if you look at this graph, it takes AlphaGo 0 3 days to get to the state of play of a very good human, like the best in the world. But in those 3 days, they play many lifetimes of Go games. So any single person can maybe play 10,000 Go games, I don't know. AlphaGo 0 sees millions of them, right? So it's still not as efficient, doesn't learn nearly as fast as people. And in fact, if you look at this, it took it 1 day of training to get to a score of 0, which most of us could do in 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And so that's millions of games just to reach to the point where any of us could get to in 20 minutes. And this is still the case with almost everything we do in AI right now. It's inefficient, it's slow, it doesn't learn easily without a lot of data. Another thing that often gets missed, so many people say experts predicted this would be 1 decade away from now, right? 1 decade later. Now that decade figure is from literally one person in one article, and for some reason everyone picked it up. In fact, if you look at the history, AlphaGo was made possible by a long string of developments in a lot of ideas. So for instance, in 2006, MCTS was a big advancement in Go. Actually, at the time, it was the best Go player and one of the first to really challenge humans. And all these ideas got folded into AlphaGo. So it's not like it was sudden. It wasn't unexpected. If you were really following the development of technology, it was possible to foresee. And then the final thing, I guess I don't have images here, is that it was a huge engineering effort. So it was like, if you look at the papers, there's like 24 alphas. It was millions of dollars of investment. It was Google really putting their weight to get to this developed. So if you have such an army of geniuses and experts pulling together decades of ideas and crazy amounts of computation, they were able to do it. But it doesn't mean we can do the same thing for any problem out there, right? We just don't have the resources to make such a huge push for everything. So in conclusion, AlphaGo, it was definitely impressive, but it's still fundamentally the same as chess, and we shouldn't worry about it implying we can now do a lot of things we could not do before. Okay, next, Atari. So Atari is video games from the early 80s, right? And this was actually before AlphaGo, but I decided to start with that just for continuity. And so it was a big deal at the time to be able to train neural nets to play these games given just the pixels. So they don't get any information about low level state. They train to play just like us, seeing this image and deciding what control outputs to do. So here, okay, I guess we can skip. So it's impressive because there's a lot of these games. You're playing from raw pixels, so that's again a large kind of input of something like 25 by 25 pixels, quite complicated thing to understand as a program. And then you need to decide between 18 actions, and you need to deal with your reward or score changing over time, right? So it's hard because of that, because of all these things. And it was also impressive because actually at a lot of these games, the AIs became better than human. So better than we are able to play these games. If you look at this line, this is kind of a line of separation where above all these games AI can do better at now, training completely from scratch, no human guidance at all. And here is where we are still a bit better. So this was a big deal back in 2013. This was actually the thing that got DeepMind on the map, and why Google acquired them and then gave them the money to develop AlphaGo. Right? So again, covered a lot in the media, where they talk about how a Google computer can teach yourself games, or this AI learned Atari games like humans do, and now it beats them, right? So it sounds like pretty impressive that now AIs can teach themselves Atari games and beat us. But again, same thing, same caveats. It's still categorically simple. So if you go back to that line of separation, which games the AI do better at than we do, those games turn out to be the easy ones. So like Pong, where you don't need to use memory. The score is pretty simple. You don't need to do much reasoning. It's basically pretty reactive. Some of these games you could probably get intelligent animals like monkeys to play well. Whereas the games that the AI does not do well at is the games that require some reasoning, some planning, some thinking, some strategizing. So we still can't beat those games. We are still doing that kind of as an area of research. And the techniques that we have developed to beat those harder games typically involve humans demonstrating how to play the game to the AI, to be able to learn from us. So again, most of those Atari games are in the same category as Go and chess. And then, just as we saw before, here's a graph showing how many hours of gameplay a human needs up there to do really well at this game Frostbite, versus how many these AI systems get to do as well as they do, right? So a human within like an hour or two can do really well, whereas our AI system needs like 1,000 hours, not even to do as well as we can. Again, this is true basically across the board with our modern AI techniques. Again, long time coming, so not very surprising. These Atari game-playing things rely on neural nets, and it has taken decades to get the algorithms behind neural nets to be developed to the extent that they are now. And lastly, as I said before, it was also a big engineering effort with dozens of people and lots of investment. So again, it was an impressive feat, but we shouldn't think that these algorithms are in any meaningful sense really better than humans or are starting to catch up with us when you think back. And let's finish with a very timely one, Dota. So this just happened yesterday, actually. OpenAI played some of the best people in the top, like, 0.05% percentile or something, at this complicated video game. So I guess I'll just explain what they're saying. It's a very complicated game where you play on a team and try to work together to outplay the other team, basically. So let me just wait a bit. Okay, so they're saying the system learns from scratch just by playing itself. And this is the game. So this is what you need to see. It's very complicated, right? There's all these stats and health and mana and powers, and there's a map, and there's different characters. So very complicated, right? So we can say here, much more complicated than Go or Atari, right? These properties that I said of why Go is simple don't apply in many cases to Dota. It's continuous, it's partially observable, there's many actions, etc. And it's a team game, so you have 5 players, typically. These are actually professional team pictures. And so we needed to train 5 AI agents to play together to cooperate. And again, there's a lot of coverage. And this is a big deal. I mean, as an AI researcher, I'm impressed that this happened as soon as it did. But again, let's look at the same caveats. So if you look at this chart, Dota is not in the same league as AlphaGo chess, but it's not far. It's on the one above it. So it's still a game. It still is easy to score. It still is easy to simulate. And because it's easy to simulate, it's easy to get a lot of data for. Okay? So I believe they say that they actually train for something like tens of thousands of years worth of gameplay to get it to work this well, right? How many years can human players play before getting that good? And all these other caveats apply. Learn slower, has been coming for a long time, and a big engineering effort. So definitely impressive, but doesn't imply we can do a lot of things we could not do before. This is still a game, and real world challenges like driving, like talking, etc. are hard. So let me just conclude by summarizing. So the fiction is that these events, like AlphaGo, like Atari, like Dota, represent huge leaps in what AI can do and the problems we can solve with AI. Whereas the truth is that these things are often very work-intensive, very high-investment engineering efforts to combine a lot of known techniques and ideas to demonstrate what we can do with present-day technology. So that OpenAI game was really a demonstration of what present-day's techniques could do when scaled up. But it doesn't mean that we can suddenly do things we cannot do before. It doesn't mean AI is going to replace us right away at a lot of other jobs on real-world skills, which are far more challenging. That's all I have.
Thank you.